Hello everybody and welcome to Organian's Puzzle Box. In this tutorial I am going to create another nice rock, using deformation in a texture painting software such as Substance Painter. But well, in my last tutorial I used Substance Painter to do this, but in this tutorial I'm going to use only a free type of approach. So I'm going to use Blender, which is free. I'm going to use a Quixel Mixer, which is also free, and also I'm going to use Unreal Engine, obviously, to import the models. So these are Nanite Meshes created just in the softwares using the displacement settings in there to create meshes. Now the workflow is going to be a bit different from what I've done when I've used Substance Painter only, because Substance Painter can export meshes directly that have been deformed, so you can then apply the textures to them. While Quixel Mixer is not able to do that, we can just texture it and deform the mesh, but we're going to have to apply into Blender that deformation to then export it into Unreal Engine. So if you guys are interested in watching that other video with Substance Painter and how I used it to create the same sort of effect, you can have a look on my video. The link is in the description below. It's a lot more straightforward than what we're going to do here, but this also works quite okay. So yeah, let's just begin. So I'm just gonna put Substance Painter down. This is Quixel Mixer. This is what you'll see when you first launch it. So I'm just going to create a new mix and just going to call it Test Nanite, and I'm going to use it as a 4K. Now, this is a plane that Quixel Mixer always gives you when you start off the scene. This is not what we're going to use for our particular project, but we are going to go into our setup and we are going to select a custom model, which we haven't yet made, but we will make in Blender in just a bit. But to begin with, let's just go over into our into our local library and see if we've got any sort of rock that we can use. Now I've downloaded this crack Nordic coastal rock. You can get this going on the online page and then going into rocks and then looking for it in here, or you can just type in that name if you want to. But again, we've got this rock over here. We can add it on top of our plane, which is quite straightforward. I believe this is rendering right now. Okay, so you can see the deformation that this has already, which is quite nice. Now, the same thing with Quixel Mixer. You will not get away from the fact that there is no information here for the software to use when it deforms. So any type of structure that goes 90-degree downwards, you will have this sort of effect that you can see in here. There are ways to sort of mask it a bit, and there's definitely a lot more ways to do that in Substance Painter than there is in Mixer. But with that said, let's just open our Blender program so we can start making our mesh that we're going to apply this texture that you're seeing right here and deform it. So I've got Blender over into here. I can delete the camera and the cube, the light, and all I need is my cube. So with the cube selected, we can go into edit mode by pressing tab on the keyboard. Again, hopefully you've got a bit of knowledge of basic knowledge of Blender. So in edit mode, we can right click and then subdivide. Now, as before, when we use Substance Painter, we only subdivided a few times and then we allow Substance Painter to deform our mesh and tessellate it. Quixel Mixer, unfortunately, is not able to do that for us. So I'm just going to subdivide it, let's say about 5 times, which gives us about 216 faces. Again, it's not ideal, but what we want to get our mesh to is about 800,000 faces or somewhere around that point. Now this is a nanite mesh, so it won't really matter. The idea of the high poly count is that we've got enough polygons to get all that detail. So as you use this, you'll get more accustomed as to what sort of resolution you'll need to get the best results. Okay, so now subdivided it. I'm going to apply that. I'm just going to leave it at 216 faces. I can go over into my modifier tab and then add a modifier. But before I do any of that, I can start playing around with the shape. So select various points on your mesh and then make sure that you've got proportional editing on. And then as you drag around, and if you scroll with the mouse wheel, you can actually affect multiple parts of the mesh. So this is all about giving it a shape that you want. In essence, it's like sculpting it a bit, but not so much, obviously, as you can imagine. This is very rough. And we're just trying to get a bit of a shape. I wouldn't allow the mesh to be very pulled in a lot of directions. So what I mean by this is you don't want to deform the shape too much, but you definitely want to get rid of some of the hard edges that you can see in here. Now in edit mode, we select everything and we'll go to faces and say shade smooth, which will then smooth our mesh up. Now, obviously this is not, we don't have a lot of subdivisions, so at this point we can add a subdivision surface, and then we can increase this maybe to 3 times, and if we apply it, this will tell us how many faces we got, and that's not enough. So if we Control Z and go 5 times and apply it, again, you could probably do the math, but again, we don't have enough faces. So even with 5 times, it'll go 6 times, and I believe now we should have enough faces. Yeah, so we got 884,000 faces, which is quite a lot, but this is what we need. Now, one of the things that we didn't do was to actually UV unwrap this. It is by default as a cube, it is UV unwrapped. So if you switch over to the UV editor, you'll be able to see it. This is the UV that we've got. I mean, we can use that, but we just don't know exactly if we're going to have any problems with it. For the time being, leave it as that. If you want to modify the UV, then do modify it before you actually start applying the subdivisions, because then, you know, modifying it right now would be very painful. So we've got our mesh. We can go in here and create, we've got a material selected, but let's just call it rock. So this is the material that the mesh has. And then we can export this, which will take a bit of time, not a lot, but it will take a bit of time just because it's such a big mesh in terms of poly count. So I'm just going to save it in here, call it rock nanite, make sure we've got selected objects only. I'm going to export it as an FBX, that's fine, and I'm going to press export, and then we'll see each other in Quixel Mixer. Okay, so now we're in Quixel Mixer. It's time to go and select custom model, which will then open a new panel, which allows us to bring in the rock nanite. Now, this obviously has a bar in here where it says loading mesh. Now, the bigger the mesh in terms of a number of polygons, the more time it will stay to, you know, on the import, the importing step. This is also going to take a bit of time in Unreal when Unreal builds the nanite part of it, but again, it shouldn't be that much of an issue. Now, we can see that this has been added in, and I think my computer has frozen. Okay, now it's okay. So we've got the mesh in here. You can see it doesn't look too good. So what we can do is we go into our layers in here, and we got some options to play around with. Now, some of them are the placement. So I'm gonna move it to box projection, which again seems to really seems to be stuttering my computer. But this doesn't look too bad. This is what we get. This is the result that we get. Now we can have a look to see if it breaks in any sort of way, but to be honest, it's not bad. So this is a 4K texture. I don't think it looks that bad, but we do have some you know, some settings around here. We've got a scale factor, so we can probably put this as 0.5, which I'm not really sure how it sort of affects it. Okay, I'm just trying. Okay, so the texture is now at 0.5, and as you can see, it does produces a bit of artifacts around here where there's a 90-degree angle. So again, you can leave it at 0.5, but I would definitely recommend that when you are in Unreal Engine, you obviously mask this. Let's just leave it like this, yeah? And then we can go back into our layers and try and fix it a bit from here. So you've got some options like the high frequency, so you can play around with these settings, which will then the high frequency will increase the sort of height of the small details. So if you put that lower, the details you can see that they sort of fade away. So you may want to keep that to where it was, but then you can play with the low frequency, which is the big details and how chunky they are. And as you can see now, we've lost quite a bit of that by changing the setting. So we might want to bring that up a bit, maybe to around here. Now this is just putting it back. I think, yeah, the threshold also allows for more fine tuning of this. again, I'm not really happy with how it looks like over in this area. So you can see the threshold will again modify a few things in here. Gotta move this mesh around. So I've got quite a bit of software actually open, so it is affecting my performance quite a bit. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of areas on the mesh that looks really good, but there's also some of them that are not so, as I said, they're not so great. But this side, for example, here is not too bad. Okay. So, but it definitely beats traditional modeling, doesn't it? Because this is done based on textures. So let's just take the low frequency a bit, make it a bit lower. Actually, if you go, it seems to be affecting it quite a lot if you even modify it slightly. So maybe do something like that. Maybe more. Okay, yeah. Now we could also, if you remember when it was at a scale of 1, it wasn't too bad. So we can probably play around and put it at 0.8, which gives us more detail and a lot more, bigger chances to just cover up the areas where it didn't look so good. But anyway, we've got our textures. Let's just say we're happy with this. So we've got the textures. We haven't added any other elements, although we could experiment quite a lot here and add all types of different textures, change the colors and so on. But this tutorial is not about that, is it? So we're now going to export the textures. We're going to go into our export tab over here, and obviously we want to have an export where you want to export the files. So I'm just going to go in my downloads, create a new folder, Nanite tutorial. So that's where my textures are going to go. I'm going to select the folder, and this is what do I want to export as. I can also export the model, but the model will be exported without the tessellation. It will just be exported as the model that you've imported, which I don't really see what's the point in that. But anyway, we do have some advanced texture setups in here, like it also gives us the displacement options. Where we can export a displacement differently. Texture sets, what we want to export, what texture sets we want to export out of this. So that's fine. We'll just click export. We'll obviously do it at 4K. Okay, so back in Blender, the only thing that I've added now is just a sun lamp in order for us to be able to see this material better. So I'm just going to activate my shader editor. And I do have the Node Wrangler add-on, which allows me to add those textures a lot easier. Although, from experience, some of the textures will just not properly be added. So I'm just clicking Add Principal Shader. This has now loaded all the textures in. We are using Eevee. I don't want to use cycles for this. So we have our displacement over here. We have our normal map and so on. Now this displacement map, there's no point in it being over there. This is the mesh, this is the texture. Let me just increase the power of this sun lamp. So I'm gonna put that to 10 so we can better see it. Okay, so we've got the base color, metallic, roughness, normal, all of them have been properly placed. So what do we do with the displacement? So at this point, we go into our modifiers. We already have a very tessellated mesh, so we don't need to do anything else on that, but we do need to add a displace modifier. So I will just add a displace modifier, which will make the mesh sort of explode a bit. As you can see, it's now fully engorged. Right, okay, so with this done, we need to create a texture over pressing the new button over here. And this is mainly to do with the fact that we need to export our mesh with it being deformed. So I'm going to change my coordinates to UV because we're using a texture to manipulate this. And just make sure you've got the UV map selected in here. With that done, we can now go into the texture. So we can press this button over here, go to the texture, and we can load an image. And the only image that we need to load is the displacement one. So after that's done, you'll see that the mesh is going to try and follow along with what we've done in Mixer, but it looks really bad. And that's because the strength of this is too big. So we will tone this down to an acceptable level to where we think that the mesh looks pretty similar to what we saw in Mixer. And I think 0.2 is pretty much that threshold. And we can obviously go even higher, you know, 0.4. You can play with the mid-level, although I never really touched that. But yeah, 0.4 seems to be too much. So I'm just going to go with 0.2 like initially, like what we initially said. So right now you can apply this modifier. You've got the texture applied as well. It pretty much looks quite nice. Some you know, some changes that you could potentially make is come over into here, and you know, you have the mesh set up now and saved in this format. You could go into paint and try and smooth these areas out if you want to, but I'm just going to leave it as it is. This is the mesh that we've got. This is what we're going to put in Unreal Engine. So I'm just going to drop it into this scene over here once I export the mesh out of Blender, which is literally the same what we've done previously. Okay, so we're now in Unreal Engine. I am just bringing my content browser, which I'm just gonna dock in layout, maybe pull it around here, you know, just so I can properly see what I'm doing, maybe something like that. Okay, I'm just gonna go into my content, do a Nanite mesh test, and I'm going to add a new folder, and I'm going to call it tutorial. So in this folder, I can now pretty much drag in my Nanite mesh, and when I do that, you'll see that it's going to ask me if I want to build Nanite, which I do. And once you press import, it will start working that out. It is going to take a bit depending on how big the mesh is. I mean, I think this is going to be less than a minute, but that's what you need to expect with this kind of a mesh. So I'm just going to press import, and then I'll see you guys after it's built the Nanite part of it. All right, so we've got the mesh in here. I'm going to double click its material so that opens up. Warning, this is default material. Oh, right. Sorry about that. Is this opening or not? Yeah. So we don't want to, obviously we don't want to edit default material. We need to create a new material. So over in here, I will create a new material. I'm gonna call it Nanite Rock. And then double clicking this, which will then open it, and we can now bring in all those maps that we've sorry, we can't bring them directly in here. We've got to drag them over into here. So now all of them are obviously coming in through, and we can now bring them in. Let me just find them in my content. So that's over in here in the tutorial folder. Yes. And these are all the maps, and I can drop them in. I don't need a displacement map actually for this, but I've dropped it in anyway. It doesn't really matter. I can just bring them all in here. So this is the metalness, for example. Oh god, I hate putting all these together, honestly. It's just, they really need to find, I'm not sure if there's an add-on or a plugin or something that allows you to just completely, you know, put these straight away inside. Okay, so we've got an AO as well, and then this is a displacement which you don't need, and the computer has froze up for some reason. Okay, and here's the normal map that we can add as well. Okay, and now we apply the material. Okay, and this should pretty much transfer over into our mesh. And did we select the material? No, we didn't. We've got to type in the material that we want, which is rock. What do we call the material again? Nanite rock. Okay, so I've just dropped in the material, and this is it, really. This is the material that we just made in the in Mixer. So I can drop this rock over into the scene, as you can see, and I can also take this, close this content browser if we don't want it anymore. And this is our rock. Let me just scale it up a bit. Okay, and this has got Nanite on. If we go into this option over here and just select the Nanite visualization and go to clusters, you can see that it's got Nanite, and it works quite well actually. And I can have 1,000,000 of these in the scene, and nothing will, you know, the performance will not be affected whatsoever and you can see I've just duplicated it there, and I can duplicate it again, and so on. So this is just one very quick asset that we made in here, but imagine you can make an entire scene of assets like this, and obviously a lot more planned out with better shapes, you know, more angular shapes or things that would work out with this particular rock that you're trying to make. So look at reference, and you'll be able to make environments in no time. If you look at the scene that I've got over here, I can basically make rocks that are a bit more stylized and add them to these textures that I've created, that I've blended together around, and to these sort of towers that I'm constructing. But then I can easily add all of these meshes, all of these rocks that I've made into the scene. And Mixer does allow for a bit of stylized look as well to its meshes. It's not like Substance Painter where it's a lot more straightforward, but you can definitely do some stylized assets into Mixer as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Please leave a like and comment and subscribe if you did. I'm going to be putting up some more tutorials out there on how to create and how to export meshes and you know, Nanite ready meshes that you can bring in from ZBrush, from these softwares as well, and really use them. I'm also going to be looking at ways to improve cleaning up the rocks themselves to make them look a lot better. But I do hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.